Good morning. It's a little bit dark in my shop this morning. We've been without power since about 6:30, where we can still do a devotion here this morning. And we look at Mark 11, verses 19 through 33 or whatever it ends with this morning. 44, I guess. No, that was wrong. But yesterday was the day that Jesus had cleansed the temple. And on his way into the city, I didn't mention this yesterday, but on the way into the city, they had seen a fig tree. And Jesus looked at the fig tree. There were no figs on it because it says it was out of season. But Jesus cursed that tree. He said to it, may no one ever eat fruit from it again. And our reading today starts with, at the end of the day, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. They went from Jerusalem back out to Bethany to spend the night. And then in the morning, verse 20, they passed by the fig tree on their way back into Jerusalem, and the fig tree was withered. Oh, we just got power back again. So that's a good thing. But this fig tree had withered, and it was just, done for. And it's a reminder that Jesus is Lord of heaven and of earth and of all that is in. And it's a reminder to me of John 3:16. For God so loved the world, the cursing of the fig tree doesn't make sense to me in that, but with different things, but I think part of it is that it just shows that Jesus is Lord of all. Hunter, please don't pound over there right now. Thank you. So I have helper again today, and we've been outside since before 8 o'clock because it was couldn't do anything in the house. Anyway, the fig tree had withered, and Jesus talks to his disciples about, having faith, having faith. It says, have faith in God. If you say to the mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, if you've got that much faith in God, you say that it'll happen. Well, and I remember sharing with you as we read Matthew that, we don't see that happen very often. And I know I have faith. I know I have trust, but I know I wonder, but yet I've never been able to say to a mountain or to a tree or to anything else, and seen things like that happen. But that doesn't mean that I don't have faith and trust in God. It's just that, Jesus says that amazing things can happen with faith, and we just go on through that. And then we get back into Jesus, as he's talking about faith. He says that, when you're praying, if you have anything against somebody, ask that your Father in heaven will forgive you and help you forgive them. And it's just that reminder of asking God for help and asking God for guidance and knowing that God is there with us always and for all time. And then in verse 27, as the disciples again came to Jerusalem, and they were walking into the temple again. This is, Jesus went into the temple. It wasn't necessarily the Sabbath. It was, this was, it was on he had his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And we're between Sabbaths. We're in the middle of the week. But yet, what does Jesus do when he comes to town? He goes to the temple. And the priests and the elders and everybody comes and they ask, where you get this authority? And, they're wondering, they still really haven't figured out who Jesus is and why he's doing what he's doing. And he's just causing these disruptions. And I think in a lot of ways they would like to be able to accept that Jesus is the Lord and Messiah, but he's doing things that are just puzzling to them, puzzling to all of us. And they ask about your authority. And again, rather than say it's from God, this would be the answer that I would like to give. But Jesus, asks the question instead, to test them. Well, where did John the Baptist get his authority? Was it something that he made up, or was it from heaven? And, the religious leaders, Mark writes, they argued with each other. They had a discussion. And I'm sure it was a kind of a heated discussion because, Mark tells us a little bit about it, that, well, if we say it's from God, then Jesus will say, well, why don't you believe him and why don't you believe me? And if we say it's from human origin, well, all the people that are followers of John and followers of Jesus are going to be upset with us for that way, and so they just plead the fifth, you know. I mean, I don't know. And today we're not really challenged to confess our faith, to show our faith that way. I mean, we can live our faith, but nobody comes right out and asks us, I mean, about our faith in God very often. We don't have those conversations, but this is one of the conversations that these religious leaders are having, you know, that, and everybody is having in Jesus' day. I mean, is how do we believe, and how do we know, and how do we trust, and who do we trust, and all of those things come into play. And how do we define our faith in a God that we can't see, we can't hear, doesn't speak to us? How do we find faith in this unknown that way? And, you know, it's as we're going to read in the book of Acts, and later on, you know, as Paul is writing, you know, he's in a city, and there's in Athens, you know, and there are temples for all kinds of gods, and one for an unknown God. And so how do we really define God? How do we really define our faith? How do we really define Jesus in so many ways? How would we do that for somebody that's never heard or believed? I mean, this is a challenge, I think. And you know, so I mean, this is where Jesus is coming from. You know, if he's saying to these religious leaders, well, do you believe that John came from God? Do you believe that I came from God? You know, and so he's putting the definition in there of who do you believe, what do you believe? Primarily, first of all, do you believe in God? Do you believe that God has the power? And that goes back to, you know, Jesus with the fig tree, and yeah, the stool spins pretty well, doesn't it? Oh, you got an owie on your finger?
No, this just started bleeding.
It just started bleeding. Well, we'll put a Band-Aid on it as soon as I'm done, okay? All right. So, just almost a catastrophe here this morning. But you know, how do we define God? How would we describe or define our faith, and why, and explain why we believe in a God that, you know, seems to be so invisible? You know, we sing that immortal, invisible, God only wise. You know, and how do we define that? How do we put that out there so that somebody else can hear it? You know, Jesus, you know, and it says, you know, the religious leaders said if we say it's of human origin, they were afraid of the crowd, for they regarded John as a prophet. And so how do we get through that roadblock of disbelief, of wonder, of need for absolute proof? And when with Jesus' answer, you know, they ask, the people respond, we do not know. And Jesus says, well, then I'm not going to tell you by whose authority I'm doing these things. Why? Well, primarily because they're not going to believe anyway. I mean, when they question him later, and they say, well, are you the Son of God? And if he says, I am, well, then it's blasphemy, because nobody can claim to be God. So Jesus knows that even when he gives them a straight answer, you know, they're not going to believe him. They have to believe it in their hearts for themselves. You know, I mean, these people, just like you and me, have to believe ourselves in our hearts and in our minds that Jesus is God, that Jesus is the Son of God that came to save us from our sins and to save the world from the devil. And so I think that's what Jesus is saying to them. You know, I'm not going to tell you, because you need to have faith. You need to believe for yourself. And I know I do, and I know that you do. And I hope and I pray that others can as well, because of you and me. May God richly bless you on your daily journey today.